Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And the journey focuses on a combination of different things, but our primary focus is the concept of the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, and the idea that in our lives we have setbacks. It's a natural and normal part of life. Um, Instead of being upset about those setbacks, which is a natural tendency to do, those setbacks need to be seen as opportunities to transform, opportunities to grow, opportunities to learn something about ourselves that we wouldn't have learned if those obstacles wouldn't have been there. I know for me, this mindset of being able to look at obstacles as opportunities has helped me, invited me out of a victim stance. And that has been a huge game changer for me regarding levels of fear, levels of anxiety, levels of projection. Um, I think today in our society, um, over the last few years, um, in particular the last 2+ years, we have seen major divisions. Um, it has been building for a while, and it is now more to the forefront. I think it's been going on throughout our history, and probably um, throughout civilizations, is this us versus them. As we know that there was a time period where that tribalism, um, needing to know who us was so that we would be able to differentiate us from them, was critical for survival. Today, maybe it isn't the same aspect of survival that we are referring to. Maybe today it isn't about surviving from an aspect of living, but it's more about um, wanting to know where we're included. Um, some people might even say that it's more ego driven. So I wrote something recently that I'd like to read to you, and then we'll reflect on it a little bit afterwards. I titled this particular article "Blind Spot." In this time when there is so much division in our country and our communities, I think we need to take a hard look first at ourselves before we look at others. Jesus taught his followers on the infamous Sermon on the Mount that we must first take the plank out of our own eye so that we can clearly see to help our neighbor with their splinter. I think this is a great teaching, but very hard to follow. I know for myself, it's much easier to generalize about other individuals or groups of people. One of my strongest desires is to avoid being a hypocrite. Clearly, the only way I'm going to be able to achieve this is by being aware of my own blind spots. In other words, in what ways am I ignorantly generalizing about others? When I make these generalizations, am I being lazy in my thinking and act the opposite of how I really want to be? I need to ask more questions and really listen to their stories. Work on being less defensive, trying to protect my ego, and focus on building relationships and building walls. This idea goes back to another topic that we talked about that Richard Rohr first brought my attention to, is this idea of dualistic thinking versus non-dualistic thinking, and that it is a developmental thing individually in our human experience as well as culturally and collectively, that this dualistic thinking, us versus them, makes a lot of sense when we are playing finite games, or when we have to survive from an aspect of things such as war. But non-dualistic thinking, which is a higher order level of thinking, meaning first we have to go through the dualistic thinking, the us versus them, so that we have a better idea of who we are based of being part of a collective, but recognizing to to move and transition into, transcend to a non-dualistic thinking, meaning, do I really know the other side, or do I just know my projections? Many times we will fall into the trap of this confirmation bias, meaning I will look for information to support the viewpoint that I already have. I think for me, being able to know enough about who I am, know what my code is, what are the virtues that I choose to live by at this time. And then at the same time, recognize that I only know what I know and that other people have their story too. And that only way that I'm going to know who they are is by listening to their story. That even though it may be new information and initially seem to be threatening to my perspective, doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be life taking. This idea of how to know who I am and where I came from, but then also being able to be open to new information, to new people, to new ideas, doesn't dilute who I am. Actually, what it should do is enrich me. But like the article that I read earlier, my tendency when I'm tired or I'm hungry, I'm afraid, is to not be able to see the whole picture, that I have this blind spot, which is focused on my smaller self, that my undeveloped part of me that wants to just protect me and doesn't want to be threatened by change or threatened by this idea that something, this new thing, this new person, this new idea could take something away instead of expanding my growth, instead of expanding my perception, my experience. I think if we can strive toward wanting to be whole, to wanting to have non-dualistic thinking, being open to the idea that first I have to know myself and where I came from and how I developed, but then also recognizing that for continued growth to happen, that I'm going to need new experiences, which are going to then stretch me and challenge me. I think I'll end with this question for you. Will you choose to see new opportunities, even if those opportunities come such as struggles or setbacks, with your heart and with your eyes wide open? As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing this information, and any comments through however you would do that, through ratings or commenting in the YouTube channel or on Facebook or Instagram would be great. I appreciate any feedback, and as always, be well, and I will see you next week.